Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to another social emotional workshop. And today we will be with Christina and Joe, and they're going to discuss understanding depression and anxiety. Welcome, you guys. Glad to have you back.
Well, thank you so much. We're super stoked to be here. And today is kind of a more somber presentation than we've had the past few weeks because we're going to be tackling depression and anxiety, the two leading mental health disorders in the United States and indeed worldwide. So I just kind of want to throw it out there that although we are knowledgeable and we're really going to try to break these down, we cannot replace medical advice. If you are feeling like you check some of these boxes, definitely seek mental health advice from a practitioner. And we cannot diagnose or prescribe ourselves, so we cannot prep you to be able to diagnose depression or anxiety, but we can get you to the point where you can recognize those symptoms in yourself and perhaps in loved ones so that you can reach out to folks who can prescribe medication and or therapy. But the reason that this is so important, particularly for our youngest people in the audience, is that 50% of mental health disorders, all sorts, arise before the age of 14, and 75% of them arise before the age of 24. So if you are at a higher risk, you're much more likely to develop these very early on. And it's our job to kind of combat stigma and help folks know how to reach out for help. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Our main goals are to kind of help you guys just understand the impact. We've got a really great video to share that helps show the depth of how this feels. And then we have lots of statistics like we normally do to kind of show you the breadth of how this is impacting folks all over Michigan and folks all over our country. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on the signs and symptoms and kind of define, compare, and contrast how anxiety and depression might look a little bit similar on the outside, but that they are in fact separate disorders that just happen to coexist together at certain times. And then we're going to provide some new resources with more avenues to reach out for help. And I have a few resources at the very end that are specific for our teens in the audience. We're going to jump right into a really deep video. It's a tearjerker. It had me kind of misty-eyed, so feel free to turn your video off if you don't want us to see that. But what I really love about this is that it shows it from the young adult's perspective. And, you know, parents are not the bad guy. They're not to blame in any way. But it is just so beautiful to see how she phrases this and how she describes a conversation explaining my depression to my mother. But without further ado, here it is. We have video, audio, right?
Yes.
Give it a second. No audio. Do you know how to click that share computer audio?
I just forgot. Thanks, guys, for catching it. All right, here we are.
Explaining my depression to my mother, a conversation. Mom, my depression is a shapeshifter. One day it is as small as a firefly in the palm of a bear. The next, it's the bear. On those days, I play dead until the bear leaves me alone. I call the bad days the dark days. Mom says try lighting candles. When I see a candle, I see the flesh of a church, the flicker of a flame, sparks of a memory younger than noon. I am standing beside her open casket. It is the moment I learn every person I ever come to know will someday die. Besides, Mom, I'm not afraid of the dark. Perhaps that's part of the problem. Mom says I thought the problem was that you can't get out of bed. I can't. Anxiety holds me a hostage inside of my house, inside of my head. Mom says, where did anxiety come from? Anxiety is the cousin visiting from out of town depression felt obligated to bring to the party. Mom, I am the party. Only I am a party I don't want to be at. Mom says, why don't you try going to actual parties? See your friends. Sure, I make plans, but I don't want to go. I make plans because I know I should want to go. I know sometimes I would have wanted to go. It's just not that much fun having fun when you don't want to have fun, Mom. You see, Mom, each night, insomnia sweeps me up in his arms, dips me in the kitchen in the small glow of the stove light. Insomnia has this romantic way of making the moon feel like perfect company. Mom says, try counting sheep. But my mind can only count reasons to stay awake, so I go for walks. But my stuttering kneecaps clank like silver spoons held in strong arms with loose wrists. They ring in my ears like clumsy church bells, reminding me I am sleepwalking on an ocean of happiness I cannot baptize myself in. Mom says happy is a decision, but my happy is as hollow as a pinpricked egg. My happy is a high fever that will break. Mom says I am so good at making something out of nothing and then flat out asks me if I am afraid of dying. No, I am afraid of living. Mom, I am lonely. I think I learned how when Dad left, how to turn the anger into lonely, the lonely into busy. So when I tell you I've been super busy lately, I mean I've been falling asleep watching SportsCenter on the couch to avoid confronting the empty side of my bed. But my depression always drags me back to my bed until my bones are the forgotten fossils of a skeleton sunken city. My mouth a boneyard of teeth broken from biting down on themselves. The hollow auditorium of my chest swoons with echoes of a heartbeat, but I am a careless tourist here. I will never truly know everywhere I have been. Mom still doesn't understand. Mom, can't you see that neither can I?
Oh, so it just kind of goes to show that a lot of times we think we're saying something that's really helpful. It can actually be having the opposite effect. So we do need to choose our words really carefully. And it's really important to note that, the teen isn't being lazy and not trying. They're really trying and they're struggling. And the parent is caring so profoundly and struggling with the fact that they don't know how to help. And it might cause them to say things that maybe they thought would help and didn't, or it might cause them to repeat things that were said to them when they were a teen, even if they didn't work. So it just kind of comes into a cycle where open communication is really important. And I just love that this is a great coping mechanism, and we're nowhere near that yet. It's much later in the slides, but writing poetry, writing raps, writing out conversations as you wish they were going to happen is a great way to cope with some of the stress that can lead to anxiety and depression. So I just wanted to say that before I forgot. But let's just kind of dig into defining what anxiety is. So stress is normal, not just common, but absolutely normal and quite healthy for us in many cases. There is eustress, which is stress that positively propels us towards healthier choices and keeps us motivated to keep trying. And then there's de-stress, which is the one we hear about all the time. And this is really negative stress that keeps us stuck in cycles of avoidance and in patterns of thoughts that actually make us feel worse over time, progressively. So anxiety is defined as a persistent, chronic feeling of worry, nervousness, and just general unease about something that we think might happen to us, or just the unknown of not knowing what will happen to us. And all of this is, again, quite normal and healthy. So we have stressors, which are just, they're things that are happening around us, people come into our lives, situations that we're presented with. And we respond to those triggers with stress. And sort of over time, we can start to respond to the stress with anxiety. And at this point, it's all quite normal and might be healthy for us. But when anxiety becomes chronic and those same patterns of thought really get set into our brain, that's when anxiety disorders start to pop out. And this is where it is no longer normal or healthy as a response, but it is still quite common. And we'll get into the stats on that in a little bit. But frequently what happens is the stress and the anxiety are there for a little while, as little as 2 weeks. And those patterns become really intense and really excessive. And we just kind of repeat the same thought over and over again in our head that we're not good enough, that something bad's going to happen if we do this way. And just fear. And these can be fear of very real situations or just fear of a perceived situation that may never come to be. Anxiety is the most common mental illness in the United States and actually throughout the entire world. It affects about 40 million adults here in the US, which is about 18% of the population of adults. But anxiety is also very, very highly prevalent in our youth as well. It is highly treatable. Unfortunately, not everybody seeks treatment, or if they seek treatment, they may end up falling off of that treatment and not complete it. So only about 37% of those suffering with anxiety will actually go get treatment and complete that treatment. And it makes us more at risk for other psychiatric issues and indeed other physical health issues as well. And the one that really sticks out to me here is if you're suffering with anxiety, you're 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for another mental health disorder. And that could be going to the emergency room for a panic attack, or it could be ending up in an inpatient mental health treatment facility for several weeks. So both of those are hospitalizations due to mental health. And they really do have a very complex set of factors that go into causing this. And it actually creates large cause and effect loops where these issues of genetics, so biology and brain chemistry, and then the nurture aspect of what events happened to us. Were they traumatic events? How did the folks in our lives respond to those events around us? And what did we learn from their responses? And they just compound and confound each other. So they make these situations worse and deepen the anxiety and deepen the stress level. But they're also really hard to tease apart even for researchers, where we can't tell which came first or which had the larger impact. Was it more genetics or was it more this traumatic event that happened? Which one is the root cause? So they both kind of are actually root causes together. And Joe, did you want to jump into developing that a little more?
Yes. So the causes of anxiety aren't really fully understood. I mean, Christina touched on a couple of them and a few of them there, but they're not really understood on how all of that works. Our life experiences, such as traumatic events, traumatic events are like the #1 risk factor. When we have traumatic events in our lives, for a mental health challenge to result from that, for people who are prone to anxiety or prone to depression, that they'll be more susceptible to the onset of a mental health challenge after those traumatic events. And like Christina mentioned, there is a genetic component. They can be inherited traits, like maybe if your mother or father or sibling had anxiety and you see the traits that they exhibit through their tics or worries or behaviors, that they might kind of have this either learned behavior or it's just an inherited trait that was passed down genetically. Also, Anxiety could be linked to medical problems. So there could be an underlying health issue. So if somebody does have anxiety, and they should go to the doctor and get a physical to see if anxiety is the outcome or a result of maybe a heart disease or diabetes, thyroid problems that you see on the screen, or it's a withdrawal from a drug or alcohol. Rare tumors could kind of trigger these anxiety prone behaviors in somebody. So anxiety could be masking an underlying condition, which a doctor visit would be really needed. All right, next slide. So number one, to talk about it, that anxiety is not really bad. Anxiety is just uncomfortable. So it serves an important function in our lives. It kind of preps you to keep safe or preps you to kind of take on an action. So everybody has some level of anxiety in themselves. And if we didn't have a level of anxiety, we would be kind of prone to some dangerous situations or some losses. So a little bit of anxiety is good. So if I was going to have a test the next day, a little bit of anxiety about that test would make me study harder. If I was worried about being late, I have anxiety, so I would want to wake up early, set my alarm, maybe 2 alarms. And that level of anxiety will kind of keep you on track and help you focus. It's kind of like that eustress or that Christina talked about. There's distress that kind of make us shut down and defend ourselves into fight or flight or freeze. And then there's eustress, which is stress that helps us focus. Meeting, if I was worried about a meeting I had tomorrow, I would want to prepare ahead. Like I had some stress and anxiety from public speaking, right? I'm sure Christina may have some also, or anybody else who does public speaking. That will only make us prepare ahead and practice and get ready. Right, standing on the edge of a cliff. Everybody has anxiety. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but you get close to a cliff and your body changes. It's like, hey, this is dangerous. Be wise, be careful, don't get too close, and it kind of protects us. And being a parent is stressful and gives us some anxious feelings. So maybe that stress and that anxiety will make us kind of reach out for some help, parenting group, buy a parenting book and such, things like that. So that's some levels of anxiety are good. They're uncomfortable, but they keep us safe. Okay, next slide. And then here's just a list of anxiety disorders that you can read some of those there. We have, the panic disorder, selective mutism, and you can read those there with some social anxieties and such. GAD, which is general anxiety disorder, in the DSM-5, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. They say women are 2 times more likely to take an onset of general anxiety disorders. So we can go to the next slide. So we look at some signs and symptoms here. And I'm going to start on the top with that overthinking, that ruminating thoughts that kind of create this, they call it stinking thinking, worried thinking. We're always kind of in the negative thinking. And then the avoidance of things. Christina's going to talk about that a little bit later on how that's anxiety cycle kind of processes and we start avoiding things. And then we have the physiology, the sweating, the stomach issues. In school, I don't know if any of you, but knows the elementary schools and middle schools, all these little kids are going to the office with stomach aches and they're calling their parents stomach aches. So are they faking a stomach ache to get out of school or out of class or to get rid of a test or to avoid a test? No, anxiety creates these digestive situations and it affects our stomach and our digestion. We have panic attacks and the lack of patience and concentration and heart rate. You see all those on the screen. So our body is talking to us all of the time. When we have some of these either physiological effects or psychological effects, that's our body telling us that something is out of balance and we really should tend to that because ongoing anxiety or ongoing stress is really kind of unhealthy and it's going to affect our bodies. So just understand that these signals are messages our bodies are telling us something.
So when to be concerned? And I'm actually going to pop back to that other one for a sec. If you are experiencing 2 or more of these for more than 2 weeks, get help. Even if it hasn't quite started to interrupt your daily activities yet, when you get help early, you're more likely to have better results and faster results. So 2 or more of those weeks, seek help. Of course, if you feel in danger, suicidal thoughts, or you're feeling like my panic attacks could trigger a heart attack. I'm having them so often, I feel really unsafe. Or if you feel that your lack of patience and your quick frustration is putting another loved one in danger and making them unsafe, seek help right away. And the really big one, the most common one we notice, is it does start to interfere with our functioning. And it can interfere with daily activities such as just getting out of bed, brushing our teeth. And that's a huge warning sign. It can interfere with relationships that we have with our children, with our coworkers. And then it can also impact our work ability, our ability to concentrate and really focus at school or focus at our jobs. And it doesn't have to impact all 3 levels of those functioning. If it impacts just one, that's enough cause for concern to reach out for help. And what happens when we don't reach out to help? Because we saw like only 37% of folks do seek help. That's a pretty astonishing low number. I was surprised by that. And the reason that this happens is we start to fall into a pattern of avoidance. And this, in fact, actually makes our anxiety grow. And we're going to talk about how the brain processes that on the next slide or two. But some of the outward signs that someone with avoidance would be displaying, they're actually leaving situations. Whether you're the teen or the parent, right? Mom brings up your grades at school and you actively leave the room. You're like, I cannot talk about this now. Not at all are we having that conversation. On the flip side, the teen comes in the room and says, Mom, I got to talk about that party on Saturday. And the mom goes, nope, not listening to that, and leaves the room, maybe slams the door. I told you you're not going. So physically leaving the situation is a huge sign of avoidance. Emotional, avoiding certain topics, avoiding certain people, avoiding certain conversations. And those can play into each other where you're seeing both present in one situation. But what happens here when we get into these patterns is it actually makes our life smaller. And small over time damages to relationships can actually cut off some of our connections and some of our safety net. So enough of those avoiding the situation responses can actually make us lose a friend, can make us lose a job, and make our world even smaller and make reaching out for help even harder. So how this happens is somehow the brain gets one of those stimuli or stressors and it goes, wow, this is dangerous. What are we going to do? Fight, flight, freeze. We got to take action. And if we end up escaping or avoiding the situation, our brain is going to go, whoa, that just saved our life. We have to do that again. We have to avoid that situation again and all situations like it so that we can stay safe. And this just ends up being a cycle that trains our brain's actual structure to make connections and prune connections to repeat that behavior over and over and over again. And this can last our entire lives. So it'll make you keep avoiding that person. It'll make you keep avoiding that situation. And you just kind of end up back in that cycle of reinforcing that avoiding it kept you safe. And that's really the only response that is going to work, is avoiding it. And procrastinating is probably the best example of this in our school life and in our work life. Procrastination is a huge avoidance key. So if you're experiencing that, it could be general anxiety disorder, or it could be something more benign. It's always worth just asking and getting that diagnosis. So how does this work? First, I just want to say I haven't actually checked out Driven in their app, but I really loved the way that the slide flowed. So what happens is that trigger happens. The stressor the person, the conversation, the topic. It comes up and our brain goes, oh yeah, that's that same thing. We've seen this before. And if it's not major or it's so common, this happens every day, our brain will just respond the way it always responds. And this could be good or bad for us. But it's not going to impact our brain structure. Our brain's going to go, yep, our structures are working just fine. Let's keep them how they are. But if something is happening that is extremely traumatic, it happens acutely, or if it's happening very frequently, it's a stressor that happens every single day. Bullying would be a big example of this. Bills and financial stress could be a big example for us adults. If it is happening either very strongly or very frequently, what's going to happen is our brain is going to go, whoa, we need to change how we're responding to this. And it's actually going to create physical changes in the connections of the brain. What happens here, where'd my cursor go? See these smaller dots right here? So here's our axon. And these tiny hair-like structures are the dendrites I keep talking about. Are these, right? And they're sending big electrical pulses, and that's why we see the little plus symbols, right? So these are electrical signals that are being sent. And what'll happen is these electrical impulses can actually trigger physical change in the structure of these dendrites. And this changes the way that we respond to stimuli over time. It can either strengthen a connection, it can cut off a connection, and whole dendrite sections could die, or they could grow bigger. You know, this could be, we're going to respond with worries, we're going to respond with avoidance, and that grows bigger. Or it could be, we're going to respond by reaching out for help, and then help turned out not to be helpful. That whole dendrite could die if enough times reaching out has been successful. It actually is a structural change happening at the cellular level of our brains. And the biggest one is, you know, just hearing me say this to you isn't enough to really help us impact that change, because we do have the power to change our thoughts. It sounds simple enough, but it's actually difficult. So we need reinforcement to do it. We can't just hear it. Test. Sorry, I saw unstable internet pop up. We can't just hear it a few times and have it work for us. We need to actually take change and do some reinforcement. We need to have those thought patterns repeat that are healthy for us. We need to have the behaviors and coping skills that are healthy for us repeat and repeat so that we can make change on that. And there really are some great technology-based ones out there that can help you retrain your brain. I have not tested Driven yet, so I can't really speak to that one, but there are amazing apps. If you just go into your app store and Google these, a lot of these can be done at home, and you can make those changes yourself. When to see a doctor? Again, if it's lasted like 2 weeks and you're having even 2 symptoms or more, definitely reach out for help. If it's interfering with work, friendships, co-workers, and of course those deep family relationships, you absolutely want to reach out for help. Anything that's really difficult to control, and a big one could be the frustration and anger that might stem from this. A lot of times we externalize fear and worry by trying to take control of the situation, and it can lead us to react very angrily and aggressively. And if we're noticing that, we definitely need to reach out for help. And then a lot of times this is going to co-occur with depression that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But if you're noticing the sadness deepen and become more apparent than some of the worries, that's a time to reach out for help. And of course, if it is increasing or bringing about a new dependence on alcohol or other drugs, you want to reach out for help then too. And this could be something as small as increasing your smoking habit. That's a big red trigger for smokers. If they are feeling really anxious, they might be reaching for that pack more. It could be a new addiction to alcohol. It could be seeking other drugs. And those all will definitely be red flags to reach out for help, because these are not adaptive coping skills, harm us and will worsen the anxiety. And of course, if you're thinking it is linked to a physical issue. So like Joe had said, there are rare brain tumors that can cause anxiety or that mimic anxiety disorders. So if you're noticing other things like blurred vision, if you're noticing rapid heart rate that could be hypertension and things like that, you definitely want to reach out for help, because you might have a physical health condition and a mental health condition, or you might just have one or the other. And really only the doctor can kind of help you tease those symptoms apart and find a real diagnosis and get you going on a plan to help. And then of course, because anxiety does often coexist with depression, we do sometimes see increase of suicidal thoughts and actions. So if anything like that is happening, you must reach out for help immediately. There are a lot of different types of treatments. And I believe that why we don't see a lot of folks reaching out for help and seeking treatment, right? Only 37% get treatment, is because they're thinking that medication is going to be the only or the main way to treat this. And that may not be so. There are a lot of different ways that it can be treated. And we really have to be our own advocate when we're developing a treatment plan with our doctor or with our psychiatrist or therapist. They should be involving you in that process. And at that point, you can jump in and say, I'm not trying medication. You do still have that right to be part of that treatment plan. So being open to medication, I do highly advise if you're feeling like this, but it's not the only form of treatment. So even if you're against all medications, it's still in your best interest to try to talk to a therapist or bring it up to your family doctor that, hey, I'm experiencing these symptoms. They could be anxiety. Now, there are lots of different types of therapy. Talk therapy is probably the oldest, goes back to Freud. Cognitive behavioral therapy is still king, at least in the United States. It's considered the most effective treatment, and it's because it's considered the most effective, it's the most widely used. There's also exposure therapy, and that's usually used for more specific phobias, but can be used with other types of anxiety as well, by rehearsing talking in front of a crowd. Say you have, speech anxiety, and I've got to go give a big speech tomorrow in class, and I don't know. So practicing it could be something that maybe your psychiatrist will bring up. And of course, there are a lot of self-help things that you can do as well. So medication really isn't the only form of treatment. We can also take more alternative medications. I do always recommend that you get those approved by your doctor before starting them, because they can interact with other medications. And in some cases, because they're not regulated by the FDA, they might not be at a dose strong enough to even help you at, and only the doctor could figure out what dose you need. So it's always important to talk to the doctor, even about over-the-counter supplements. But a good one is St. John's wort. We're hearing about that more and more, and maybe it will be developed into a more prescription type of medication. There's lots of support groups, there's apps and music and things that you can do to really work on self-care. And we're going to have a session on self-care a little later in the series as well. But those types of stress management techniques you can do at home, you can do with loved ones. And it might not require you seeing a therapist every month for that, or every week. You might see them very infrequently, and they check in on some of the self-care things you're doing at home. So the fear of having to take a medication or the fear of missing work to go to a bunch of appointments, don't let it keep you from seeking help. That's the main the main gist there. And there are lots of prescription medications. Sometimes for anxiety, you might get prescribed a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's a pretty common one. And then panic attacks, sometimes we see benzos being prescribed a lot for that, like Ativan, and things that can kind of really calm the central nervous system. But because those are habit forming and can be highly addictive, they are usually prescribed in very low amounts and only for short periods of time to kind of get the panic attacks slowed down so we can get at the root issue. So many things you can do just by tuning your lifestyle, staying physically active, staying off alcohol and drugs, or trying to reduce if you are using, cutting back on smoking, eliminating or taking caffeine back a little bit. A lot of us drink too much caffeine, myself included. About 200 milligrams a day is more than sufficient to give us that boost, but without giving us some of the caffeine-related headaches and other types of issues. So just kind of cutting back on caffeine can go a long way to reducing anxiety. And of course, sleeping and eating a healthy diet are other great ways that we can tackle this. And all of these are true of depression as well. So creating this kind of whole wellness approach can help us avoid just a plethora of mental health and physical health disorders. Joe, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Okay, so what is depression? And we'll go to the next slide there to talk about that. Depression, it's not just the blues. You know, it's a universal human response to separation, disappointment, and loss. We all do feel blue at some time. We feel kind of down, lonely, kind of detached a little bit, but it's just not typical blues. When we do have the blues, we have adaptive behaviors that we can deal with some of that sadness. You know, we can have hopefully healthy coping skills to deal with some of the blues that we have through separation or loss or disappointment and things. We adapt our behavior to get through some of those sad days and those sad feelings. Holidays, anniversaries, they kind of bring on the blues. And we go through some of those sadnesses, especially if we had lost, you know, during the holidays or anniversary of a loved one's coming up that's not with us anymore. You know, that's very common to have the blues. But depression is a little bit different than that. And we'll go to the next slide. That depression, when sadness is so intense that it doesn't respond to those changes I just talked about. So we can't like modify our behavior and use some of these coping skills to deal with it, that it's really intense. It doesn't respond to simple reassurances, and it continues beyond the expected impact of that stressful life event. So we're trying to deal with something, a loss of grieving could last 2 years. But if that loss is really affecting you and really bringing you down, some of the things that were connected to that anxiety slide, if it's inhibiting you having normal activities and socializing and doing things, then that's going to be a real impact on our lives. So this depression, that mood disorder, it changes the way we feel, it changes the way we think, it changes the way we handle daily activities. Our sleeping, our eating, our working is going to be affected by this level of depression that's kind of continuing. So depression is serious because we can't let it go untreated, and we'll talk about that, but it is serious, but it is treatable. It's a treatable mood disorder with some of those things that Christina talked about with the medical and psychological talking to a doctor or psychologist. So it is treatable, but when somebody does have a level of depression, they think that there's no way out of this black hole, and they think that treatment won't help them, and they stay in that cycle. So like you see here, symptoms must be present for every day, nearly every day for at least 2 weeks to really be diagnosed with depression. We'll go to the next. Next slide. Okay, here's some prevalence, and you can see the overall prevalence at about 13% there. And then the female is really high, up to 20%, and the male down to, a little bit close to 7%. Now you would say, is that accurate? I mean, do females have more depression? Is it more prevalent in the female population than it is the male? And we kind of would have to process that and say, I don't know, because females are more apt to reach out for treatment or for some help. In males, maybe they're dealing with depression, but I can't because that would make me weak. So I don't seek help. I'll just do whatever coping skill I need to do to get through it, right? Change my behavior, hide it. So having males have such lower prevalence of depression doesn't really mean they do. It means that they may be scared or feel like they're weak if they went out and got some help. So we don't have that data. But let's look at the age range from 12 to 17 there. And you can see 12 years old, you got, nearly 5%. And then it just gradually increases in the late adolescence there. So we're wondering what's going on in the 15, 16, and 17 years old, and what's going on in those ages. I mean, there's a lot of changes in adolescence. Adolescence is a tough spot for children or for youth. They're no longer children, but they're not yet adults. There's a lot of challenges, physical challenges with their physiology and their changes of the body. They're going through emotional changes, physical changes, relational changes. So there's a lot going on in that youth's life. So if they don't have the coping skills and some support, then that level of anxiety or depression is going to be a little bit more prevalent in their lives if they don't know how to handle those emotions and feelings or know where to reach out to get some support. Not necessarily treatment, just another adult or a safe teacher that they can talk to about some of the challenges. In the last section of that chart there is the race and ethnicity. You can see the Hispanic and the white and the black and there's cultural differences on how comfortable somebody is to reach out to get some help. I'm 100% Italian, and my father always said counseling was for the weak. Keep that to yourself. Don't air your dirty laundry. Don't trust nobody. So I did have challenges throughout my life in my youth, but I had no one to go to, and I had to hide it and suppress it all. So it's really important to really get a handle and understanding on anxiety and depression. And then when we see somebody struggling with it, that we know how to reach out to them, to support them, and to give them resources. So we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out too, here we kind of see that the African American one is low. And just like what Joe said with males, I don't have a study to prove this, but my opinion is that this is low, not because they're not experiencing depression, but because they're afraid to reach out for help. It doesn't get diagnosed. Because for depression, it's estimated that 50% of the cases go undiagnosed. So our males and our African Americans could be a larger proportion of the undiagnosed ones, but they're still experiencing it.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat wrote that that is skewed. And would you want to comment a little deeper on the skewed of that chart, if you're willing to take yourself off of mute?
Well, I was just saying that, like, I'm agreeing with what she was saying. Basically, I mean, and it would probably go across the board that everything is not diagnosed and documented. So we're not going to know what the official numbers. These are only the numbers for, who has actually, been documented and diagnosed.
Very true.
Yeah. And is it Sharonda? I'm thinking, especially in our African American young boys, what happens is they actually get slapped with behavioral issues and suspensions in schools instead of being sent to get the help. So they get punished at a higher rate. We know that looking at statistics that they are suspended and expelled at much higher rates. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking they're punished for displaying the behavioral issues instead of helped and diagnosed.
Yeah, that's why we've had some training on the restorative practices.
Yeah.
So, we're trying to do things to not just, go those routes.
Yeah. It's a tough game for sure.
And somebody put in the chat, availability of care is an issue in low socioeconomic communities. Absolutely.
Insurance, transportation. I think those are a few slides later, but you
Yeah,
guys are just catching them on the spot.
Yeah, so we'll go to some causes of depression here. And again, there are some genetic components that it is, could be genetically passed on through generations through the biochemistry or brain pathways. Physical conditions, if we have a chronic pain or heart disease or cancer, that's really hard to handle. It's emotional, it's, facing end of life or challenges and pain. So that could bring on that depression where we don't feel like we're going to get through this. And it's just weighs so much on our shoulders that we fall into a depression of sadness and loss and just giving up. Environmental causes, life events like those losses we talked about earlier. Any triggers, like something that you can't face, that you can't deal with, something just triggers you into this emotional, either detachment or emotional rage that really affects our level of depression and anxiety, or just that chronic stress that could bring us down. And if that lasts for longer than 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks, and it's excessive, then it needs to be tended to. And then some psychological causes of that repetitive. In psychology, they call it cognitive distortion. It is to make it a little more blunt, stinking thinking, right? It's our repetitive, ruminating negative thoughts, like those pessimistic thinkers that always in the negative can really bring us down and feel like there's nothing good in this world. Next slide. And the types of depression, we have the major depression. That's that mostly most of the day, nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. Then we have the persistent depressive disorder. That's this dysthymia. That is just long-term. It's just chronic, low-level, long-term depression. You can see it could last up to 2 years. Then we have other unique circumstances, prenatal depression. We have that SAD there, the seasonal affect disorder. Not seeing the sun, winter time, everybody's kind of locked down, especially in the COVID pandemic we're in right now. I don't know, hope you're getting out into nature, walking around the block or something. Hopefully the sun will come out to make us feel better, but we do have those seasonal affective disorder. A bipolar depression, psychotic depression, those delusions and hallucinations. So there's a few different types of depression that you see there. We'll go to the next slide. And kind of similar to the anxiety signs and symptoms, you can see the weight loss or gain, the concentration, the guilt, that's that ruminating thought that you're guilty, you did something wrong. Inability to have fun, just like that opening video we saw. How it's not fun to go to a party and you want to go, but you can't go. It's not fun to go have fun when you don't want to have fun. I mean, that was just a deep movie skip there, video skip. The helplessness, that learned helplessness, the why even try, it's not going to work. And then our, loss of energy, our changing sleep patterns, level of anger. People that are depressed, some people just are apathy. They don't have any feelings. They just go into this low level, not caring. But some people with depression, they are triggered anger. Anger is it's like a coping skill. So the pain I have inside, I'm going to cover up that pain with anger and control everything. Keep me safe. And then, decreased motor activity where you're not getting the exercise and moving around. And then that leads to the pain. Our bodies could start having back pain, headaches, and neck aches, and our joints. So there's a lot of signs and symptoms, just like the anxiety. Once our body is talking to us, it's saying that something's out of order and it needs to be tended to. So when to be concerned. We talked about when to see a doctor and with anxiety and such, but when to be concerned. These three categories here. When it disrupts a person's ability to work, pretend school, to carry out any daily activities, cleaning the house, doing whatever activities that you're doing, or engage in healthy, satisfying relationships. If you can't really participate in these kind of categories here, then we do need to address that and talk to somebody and get some resources. And the duration, how long has this been going on, and how severely is it those three things? Like I said, anxiety, minor anxiety, we can deal with it with some change behavior and stuff. But that anxiety where it's loss of control, panic attacks, depression when it's lasting those 2 weeks and we're not having the ability to do these things, the earlier we identify these signs and symptoms, the faster and shorter our recovery will be. So identify them early, get some resources, and we'll be able to get through those challenges a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. But I teach a mental health first aid class. It is a one-day class. It's an 8-hour class. It's how to identify signs and symptoms of mental health challenges in youth or in adults. And the reason I'm telling you this is they have a statistic there. From the onset of a mental health challenge to when somebody reaches out to get some help, how much time do you think passes? And just in concerns of time, I'll give you the answer there. If somebody wants to put how much time passes in the chat, that's fine. I'll give you like 10 seconds to chime in. The median amount, the middle amount is 10 years. 10 years, yeah, sure, some earlier, some later, but the median amount is 10 years from the onset for when somebody reaches out to get some help. I mean, that was astounding to me. If we have coping skills to deal with those, of course, we're just going to deal with those coping skills and get through those challenges. Hopefully they're healthy coping skills, but a lot of times we use unhealthy coping skills to get through those challenges and such.
20 years. I mean, if 50% of these cases are popping up before the age of 14, and the family's ashamed of getting help, they're not going to allow the child to get help until they're maybe an adult and they can reach out themselves. So that could be a huge part of that number. And then, like Joe had said, maybe they turn to a coping skill that turns into an addiction, and then they have alcohol dependence for 6 out of those 10 years that they didn't seek help because they were now ashamed of the alcohol more than they were ashamed of the depression. And it just kind of protects its own illness in a way. The brain does, because it thinks that this is saving us. It thinks we are avoiding pain and avoiding embarrassment. So it almost kind of keeps us stuck in that cycle. Do you want me to jump in, Joe?
Oh, no, that's okay. So you just caught me doing something on the side. Okay, so what keeps people from seeking help? Like Christina kind of mentioned, the stigma. I don't want to be labeled. I don't want my family or friends or my workplace or my teachers to kind of think that something's wrong with me. Denial. How to get help. Maybe somebody just doesn't know how to reach out and get some help. They don't know what steps to take, who to call, or they just say it won't work for me. No, I heard about this psychotherapy or this cognitive behavioral therapy. No, it ain't going to work for me. Or there's a fear. So if somebody's not getting help, or you ask them and you reach out to them and they're refusing help, we need to know kind of why are they refusing help. It could just be they don't want to take meds. They think that depression, the only way to get through depression or anxiety is medication. And if they're against medications, there are other resources like Christina talked about earlier about different types of ways to address depression and anxiety. All right, next slide.
Yeah, Alan was bringing up sometimes they're not aware that this has even hit an issue yet. They're not aware of those feelings and patterns within themselves to be able to know. But a lot of those fears, I just wanted to add, are real. There are jobs that if you have this diagnosis, you can no longer work in that field. There are situations where, folks are afraid of losing scholarships for school. They're afraid of losing custody of their children. They're afraid of being put in long-term inpatient care because maybe a family member in the past, when we had large institutions, was institutionalized, and they just are so afraid that that's what will happen to them. That worst case scenario over and over in our heads makes them afraid to reach out. And they are real fears that
Especially
we kind of have to cope with.
Especially with youth going through puberty and going through those changes. They don't know if this is normal or if it's abnormal. They don't know what's going on, and they're scared. I'm the only one going through this, so they kind of hide it or deal with it themselves. So the treatment for depression, just like anxiety, there's professional treatment with physical exam, psychotherapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is probably the best treatment for anxiety as well as depression, to change that thinking. Then there's that interpersonal therapy and problem-solving therapy, like some situations that you're in that might bring you down, thinking that you'll never get out of this hole. Well, just some life skills, some problem-solving therapy, so you could know that you're in control, some autonomy building, that you're independent and can deal with this. Also medication. I heard Christina earlier mention medication, against medication, but if you're against medication for depression is like a really good first step. I mean, because if you're lagging those feel-good endorphins like dopamine and serotonin in your brain, getting that boost through medication and doing talk therapy is a perfect combination. And then you can wean yourself off of those medications and continue with the talk therapy. Or
the doctor will wean you off. Don't self-wean.
Absolutely. Or like if you don't want to take the medications, well, there are those cognitive psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy to get through those. And if you went through the physical exam, the psychotherapy, the medication, and none of that's working, the last step here, which is brain stimulation, that's the electroconvulsive therapy, the ECT. That is like the last line if nothing's working. And people have a misconception of that. It's painless. They put you under. You're not conscious when this is happening, and they put electrodes there, and they kind of stimulate parts of the brain to kind of wake up those endorphins and those dormant parts of your brain.
Yeah, it triggers those structural changes so that you can absorb those hormones better. Same thing with the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It keeps you from just reabsorbing that serotonin so that it can be more active, and that you can really reap the benefits of the serotonin your brain's already naturally producing.
Yeah, and then the personal ones, the alternative medicines. Now, these aren't approved by the FDA and such, but there are cultural differences. Like your grandmother might say, hey, when you're dealing with this, we do this culturally, meditation and prayer, acupuncture, faith and nutrition. Like somebody said, go to the Bible early. Was that in this one? Or was that in a different training? Somebody said every time they had a problem, they went to their parent. The parent didn't have the tools. They said, go read the Bible. And just didn't know how to support that youth that was having that challenge. Exercise, oh man, exercise is probably just as good as medication. If depression and exercise is such a great stimulant, endorphins, get your adrenaline going, get your dopamine levels going, and you feel good about yourself.
Yeah, we're always talking about impacting that serotonin. I think a lot of us, even our younger viewers, have probably heard of it. But there's also dopamine, melatonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and there's some new research looking into acetylcholine. There are a ton of neurotransmitters and hormones that are involved in this process. So there are new medications coming out, and there are certainly more traditional herbs that we're restudying and kind of looking at with a deeper lens than we previously did. Just a decade or so ago, it would have been blown off as, Eastern mumbo jumbo. but we're starting to take closer looks at those because now we have more information. So faith, meditation, acupuncture, all of these actually have pretty good results in other countries, and have been studied for long periods of time in certain cultures, and they're pretty effective. So, talk with your doctor before turning to like herbs and things, just to make sure it's not going to interfere. But it might be a great route for you. So just kind of let your therapist know, I'm really interested in these alternative pathways. Can you support me in that journey? And if they can't, you might need to find another therapist too.
Yep. Even if you're not seeing a therapist, ask your doctor. If you have a primary care physician, I was thinking of doing this herb to deal with some of the things I'm going, and get that doctor to kind of approve or give their opinion of what you're going to do. The next slide is why treatment is important. Untreated depression really doesn't get better. Untreated depression often gets worse. And then personal and work relationships are going to suffer. So if you're not getting treatment, it's just going to be a little tougher in your work relations, personal relations, school, and it may lead to those unhealthy coping skills like that alcohol and drug and poor physical health. And the last one is increased risk for suicidal thoughts and suicidal or fatal accidents. Somebody who has this hopeless and helpless feeling of depression, they might not care about the results of some risks that they take, or they might even have those suicidal ideations they don't want to lose their life. They just want the pain to go away. So it's at a higher risk if somebody is in that deep depression that they reach out and get some help. Christina,
So these are the same risk factors we have been talking about that lead to mental health issues and substance abuse disorders. Trauma is the leading number one factor that's a risk. And it's a risk for both anxiety and depression. And it's also a pretty high risk for co-occurrence, especially if that trauma was in early childhood. It can be just a huge risk factor. Any type of stress related to illness. So we kind of talked about some illnesses could lead to depression or anxiety. And then other times the illness might be mimicking the symptoms. So there's kind of, both of those are possibilities. But if we just think about, hearing that you have cancer, that alone, even if the cancer is not impacting your mental health, can cause more ill mental health, because it's extremely stressful to find out that you have something like that, and it's going to uproot your life, and your brain will kind of just get into this thought of worst case scenario. I've got to quit my job, going to need help with this, my hair is going to fall out. And those ruminating thoughts could lead to new or worsening anxiety. Some of us are just more prone because of our nature, our personality types. And those are a little bit harder to distinguish. But folks that kind of get in a lot of shame and a lot of guilt are going to be more prone to developing depression and or anxiety. So those are just kind of personality differences that might be more nurture versus nature. But of course, there's a lot of the genetic risk factors. So if anyone in your family has been diagnosed with this, that's your blood relation, you are more likely to develop it. And then, of course, if there's a history of drugs or alcohol use, either in yours or, again, in your family history. So children of alcoholics are more at risk for depression. Even though they didn't have alcohol disorder, it may have caused trauma in their childhood that's going to put them at a higher risk. So there's a lot of overlap of nature versus nurture. But all of these things together can confound on one another and put the individual that has more than one at extremely high risk for developing these. And I just kind of wanted to point out that there is no causal link between anxiety and depression, but they do very often co-occur together. So anxiety doesn't cause depression to happen, and depression doesn't cause anxiety to happen. but quite often they will emerge their ugly heads around the same time, or over the course of not seeking treatment for one of them, you could develop the other. And then protective factors. Oh, these are the exact same protective factors we've been talking about. Having some healthy coping skills and healthy habits around our most basic routines, sleeping and eating and exercising. Those are going to be enormous protective factors throughout our whole lives for all sorts of chronic illnesses, be they mental or physical in nature. Having a healthy self-esteem and self-image, so believing that we are a worthy person in this world, and having hope for the future. Having solving skills to reach out that can help you solve problems and cope with extreme events that crop up. Having choices and autonomy, especially for our budding young adults. They, it's not one day you're just gonna hop out of the cart. It's you want to hand them the reins and then sit next to them as they steer and be, providing opportunities that they have some autonomy in, but, we're not totally jumping off ship and letting them hold all of those responsibilities on their own shoulders. Spirituality has also been shown to be really helpful, whether that is very traditional religious practices or very loose spiritual beliefs about communing with a higher power through meditation. So no matter what your belief is, having a faith of any kind is very protective for us. The family routines we already talked about. So eating, sleeping, and exercising, the biggest ones. If you've got set routines on that, it's a big protective factor. And community bonding. And this is what I think is missing during COVID. We do need a lot of different connections in our life. And usually our inner family can't fill all those roles for us. We need to develop relationships with others inside of our community as well, be they spiritual relationships, sport teams, whatever they might be. Just having other people that are our friends and that we can trust with sharing something so profound as depression and anxiety is a really big protective factor. Support systems, and these can be inside the family or they can be structural, right? They can be inside the school at the state level. And those support systems are kind of present throughout every aspect of our lives. But we can get severed from them. So fostering those internal family support systems is really important, keeping that communication. And then knowing how to reach out for greater support systems that might be available at the county or state levels. So here's a few more support resources. These are a little bit more specific for adults. And I know we do have a lot of educators here. Here has Work-Life Solutions, where we can do these where it's really just for professional development. So our sessions that we're doing now are kind of for the whole community, for students, for parents, for everyone. But Joe leads some that are specifically for professional development.
And that's connected to an employee assistant program. Like somebody contracts with us to be their employee assistant program, and then they get some free development training. But you guys are getting it free right here in this room here. So that's great.
Yeah, and I know in working with youth for the past 5 or so years, I hear a lot of them say that they do not want to call a 1-800 number, even if it's anonymous. They want to text it. They want to get text support versus calling and having support that way. So these are some great text and chat options where you can reach out to help, and you don't you don't have to give your name. It's anonymous. They don't even have to hear your voice. They don't know what you sound like. They don't know what you look like. It's a safe spot to reach out for help. The National Suicide Text Line is a great one. And then locally here, Henry Ford is just amazing. They have a lot of great programs that are specifically for teens and young adults. So they're a great resource as well. And What's going on in the chat? All right, did anyone want to add or talk about anything that we mentioned today?
I would simply say that a lot of times therapy is kind of pigeonholed into, well, something must be wrong with me if I have to go, but that's not necessarily true. There's well-being therapy. I mean, just as you would go for checkups and so forth. I mean, a lot of times, I was married for 30 years. I needed therapy, right? So, you know, I'm saying it halfway tongue in cheek, but it was a requirement. And just to go to have somebody who's non-judgmental. It's not like they haven't heard this before. Friends are one thing, but it's like there's a limit to what you can tell anybody who's supposed to be your friend.
Yeah.
So, and somebody who's a professional who's heard these scenarios, somebody with some experience, and really offer you all sorts of affirmation, confirmation, direction, and so forth and so on. So, a lot of us have insurance packages. Why not use them?
Yeah, there are definitely still some big barriers to care, but they are being lessened. We are slowly breaking those down as a society, and breaking down the stigma is really the first step. We're slowly breaking down that stigma. There are a lot of different therapy options now that really involve goal setting and a lot closer to like a mentorship role.
Right.
And something's wrong with you, we're going to cure you through talking about it. It's not about fixing what's wrong. It's about developing what can be the healthy new you,
Right.
and really cementing that. So thank you for bringing that up.
That you just want that anxiety, depression thing it's isolating. And so it's like, there's this feeling of that I must be unique kind of thing, which is further isolating. And in my particular personal experience is that it's usually just not. You are not unique that way. And so there
Yeah.
are lots of people who, live in negative spaces because of a refusal to reach out and accept that, there's help out there.
Yeah. For 10 years, when Joe first told me that, I was astonished. I thought a lot of you said it 2 years. I'm like, okay, 10 years. People can get
Yeah,
trapped in those cycles.
absolutely.
Joe, I know you had a couple of cool PDFs. Did you want to throw them in the chat for everybody? Or do you want me to email them out? What's easier?
Is it possible for you to go back a couple of slides with the adult resources, please?
Yeah. Screenshots. The adult one or the youth one?
Adult.
She's frozen. I'll get the
Okay.
slides and
Thank
send
you.
them to you.
All right, thanks.
No problem. And it doesn't look like she's gonna unfreeze anytime soon. So with that being said, thank you all for joining me. When I receive the slideshow presentation from her, I'll send it out. Let me know if you want it, and I'll just send it out to you.
Miss
Thank you.
Toni,
Mm-hmm.
do you post this too on the YouTube channel, or does this?
These will be beginning to be posted January 28th.
Okay.
The media department schedules them out weekly, so it's not like he's going to upload all of them at one time. It's like he's going to do one every couple days or so. So
Okay.
beginning on the 28th, he's going to start posting from the very beginning.
Okay.
Okay?
Thanks.
No problem. And thank you all for joining and getting all this great information. It's very informative. I'm finding out a whole lot of things that, I just really didn't consider before, and it's pretty purposeful, especially for this time and what we all are enduring and going through. So thanks again, and I will be sure to send it out to you if you send me a request.
Thank you, Toni.
Thank you.
No problem. Everybody have a great day.
You
Have a better
too.
one.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye now.